Hi, so today I'm showing you the making of the Stonehenge Cup. So these are some of the images that Graham was able to take when he got to handle the piece. It's a very flat pot. It's had some fixing on it here, so the image isn't great, but you can kind of see it's been fixed at some point. So we definitely know this side is accurate and what it would look like. This side is somebody else's interpretation, and one of the things that we notice is it's a lot shorter on this side than it is on this side, and it's hard to tell whether that is because of the way it's been fixed or if that is because it was the way that it was. We tend not to make it quite such a difference in size. There's about a centimetre difference between that side and that side, because when we've looked at it, some of the pieces don't appear to entirely join up. So we've interpreted it that perhaps when it was fixed there were maybe some errors made, possibly. We don't know for sure. Now you are pinching the pot, because you're starting off with a round ball of clay. You want to make sure it's nice and flattened down as you pinch it. So what I tend to do is I get my ball of clay and I'm tapping it down to start off that flattening process. Now from our measurements we know the size that we're going for, so I've got my calipers and I'll check it regularly. Obviously this isn't something that the people who first made it would have done, because they would have just made it, but as we're replicating it we have to be a little more careful about how we do it. I am using a modern turntable, I must admit, but the people who first made them, if you put a wooden board with some grit underneath, you can get a basic turntable to be able to get that rotation as you work. So I'm just bringing it out, not as far as it's going to be, because I'll do that when I'm pinching it, but I'm bringing it out as far as I dare. So you're ending up, I suppose, with what's essentially a bit of a hamburger shape. And now we're going to start pinching. So it's a similar kind of style to how you would pinch any pot. Thumb is going into the clay and I'm working downwards. Having handled the pot, Graham knows that the base is relatively thick. So what I'm doing is trying to bear that in mind as I'm pinching, and to try and feel to make sure that I am not thinning it out too much. And we're pinching into the sides. So there we are, so I've pinched into there and going round. With pinch pots it's slow and steady and going all the way around. If you kind of go halfway around and stop, obviously you're not going to get a nice even pot. So I'm bringing that round and then I'll check again with the calipers. So we're going to bring that out, and again you're ending up with this very flat topped pot with quite abrupt sides as we go. Again, I'm trying to evenly thin the walls out, and now I will start to push it out to get the full diameter that I'm working towards. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate when we make a replica. You've got to, you know, as a creative person, you've also got to, you do end up adding a little bit of your own style to a thing. So we're making it as close as we possibly can, but not so close that we're obsessing about the exact millimeters. We're getting as close as we can, but we're still keeping that the sort of feel of a beautiful handmade crafted object. Hopefully that makes sense. It's just, I think you can lose the, I don't know, the real soul and beauty of a piece if you're so obsessed with the millimeters and not thinking about the overall finish of the piece that you are creating. The other thing is that the pot will change slightly when it's fired. It'll shrink, so we account for that but yeah, you can't get it absolutely perfect. And now that I have got the sides as I want them, we also know that the height of the piece wall there is about 4 centimeters, so I'm working towards getting that now and pinching this in to thin it out as it is in the original and get that very, very basic shape in. The best way to do this pot is to roughly work it, and then from there I'm going to leave it, and that will get left to dry out a little bit, and we'll come back to it and finish it off at a later date. So the pot has had a chance to dry. It's much firmer, which just means it feels less fragile when I'm working with it. It's holding its shape better. I don't feel like if I touch it it's going to distort it. And at this stage we are doing some cleaning up. So we have the image here, and in the image it's got a little bit of a lip, so we're going to start to establish that lip. We're also going to neaten up where you can see all these finger marks. We want to get rid of some of that because the original is quite well finished off. So doing a little tweak, re-establishing the shape. We want this to be not a very tight angle, but we just want that to be smoothed off, so where it comes up the wall and into the shoulder, we've got a nice obvious mark, an obvious line. Here I'm going to start pinching up into that rim, so going all the way around and pinching between my thumb and finger and starting to establish the rim there. Okay. I also want to get the shape here, that nice curve on the shoulder up there. So we start to get it the shape we want it to be, just to perfect that shape. Again, using small pinches. If I'm using small pinches, I'm less likely to get the finger ridges. There will be there because it's made by hand, but what you're trying to do is minimize that so that when you come to have to scrape it over, it's not too big a deal. And what I wanted to check was the internal measurement there, see if I'm happy with it, see if it matches the original. I'm pretty happy. The next thing that we do once we're happy with the rim is we want to smooth off the walls here. So I'm using a bone scraper to scrape down the sides. I'm trying to eliminate the major ridges created by finger marks. I'm not trying to entirely obliterate the fact that it was handmade, but just so that the surface, the end surface of the original Stonehenge cup is nice and smooth. So we want that to remain. So we're going all the way around the entire wall, and I might do this a couple times depending on how I feel. Go all the way around. And then I will come up and do the upper section as well. And I will use my bone tool to again start to really get that rim introduced by using the corner of the scraper to go, the edge of the scraper to go right into the edge of where I want that rim to start, and we're introducing that. Final stages is smoothing that off. Again, I'm trying to remove any obvious lumps and bumps. A little bit of lumps and bumps is fine, but we want to get rid of any obvious finger impressions. And as a final finish, a very quick wipe over with water. We're trying to get a nice smooth even finish, so by scraping over I have pushed some of the grit that's in the clay, and which would have been in the clay, down into the body of the pot, the wall of the pot. And now with the slip, the wet fingers, I'm smearing a layer of slip over the top of that to kind of seal that grit in, to give it a nice smooth finish. Even though the clay is very gritty, it gives it a nice smooth finish. So the next stage, now that I've got my pot neatened off and I'm pleased with it, is I'm preparing it to decorate. It has holes cut in it all the way around to create these sort of little pillars, I suppose you could call them, that go all the way around. And so I want to make sure that I'm cutting them evenly. So what I tend to do is I tend to just give myself vague markings. Now, I may or may not follow these exactly. I may go slightly off as I go around, or slightly change how I'm doing it. The main reason I mark these is because at the end we usually end up with one that's very short or very thick. So now that I've kind of got that in mind, I will cut this one here, and then I will cut the next one here, and I'll slowly grade them in until they're about the same thickness apart. So it's a way of ensuring that you get it even as you can. The original is not 100% even, which is why I'm not using a ruler or anything. I'm doing it by eye, but it's not completely out, and therefore it is good to give yourself the opportunity to get it as accurate as you would like it to be. So I slit sort of a rectangle in, and I have to say this is always quite tricky. You want to make sure that your clay isn't too wet, because if it's really wet you can see it's sticking to the blade, but if it's really dry it's really difficult to cut out. So you want a nice consistency where it's not too wet, not too dry. And I work round to my next one, and again I'm just trying to even out the spacing a little bit as I come round. And I'll go around and cut all of these out. I've gone a bit wonky there, but that's okay. The original had some slightly wonky ones. So what I'll do is cut all the way around. I'll do that, and then I'll come back and show you the next bit. So my holes are all cut, and the holes now at the minute are very rough, very rough indeed. And I've cut them squared off at the bottom, but in the original they're a little more curved. But when you look at the original, it looks as if they weren't cut curved, and I have to say to do that is quite tricky. I've been using this knife. It did normally have a pointed end, but I think I did something silly with it and I broke it. I used it to open something or something like that, and I ended up breaking the tip off. So had I had a nice pointed tip to my blade, it probably would have been easier to get that oval shape, but even so it's quite tricky because of the way that the wall's quite so thick. So what it looks like with the original and with the tool marks from the original is it looks like they've taken a rounded tool. I'm using this, it's a lovely bone tool. It's one of my favourite tools. So it's just a piece of shaped bone, but it's a really lovely tool to work with. What I do with that is I then come in and I press, and you can see on the original where you just get this slight little lift, which is what would suggest to me that that is the way that they've done it. So using the tip of your tool, thumb to support, and you're just pushing inwards and going all the way around to just round off the edges of all those holes. I will then do the bottom as well. I tend to turn it again. I like to give the back of the pot where I'm pressing against support. So I'm going to come round and do that. I'll do this to all of them, so we end up with more of an oval or a pointed end to this. And then I use a very small amount of water. to just rub over the surface there. What I'm trying to get rid of is any real roughness, but also anything that once fired that can easily chip. So when you've got thin little bits like that, they can easily chip, and it creates a potential weak point in your pot, and it would be a shame to have it all beautifully fired and then you chip it and you end up with an obvious scar on the piece. So we just get rid of those so we don't have any obvious scarring. Again, I'll go around and do all of that, and then from there I'll begin to decorate the top here using a cord. Right, at this stage we've got them cut, and you probably want to get yourself settled in, get yourself comfy, because the next stage of decoration does take some time. We have a piece of cord, so hand twisted cord that we've made, and we're going to use that to decorate the top of the pot. It is a very decorative piece on top. So it's got 3 rings here, then it's got this sort of grid, and then it's got a single line there. And so that's what we're going to do. With this, it is just steady goes, and working all the way around. I find once if you can kind of get it to stick as you press it in, if you can kind of get it to stick in one section as you go around, once it's kind of held in place, the tension created by that holding in place in your finger just makes it a little bit easier. If it's loose, as it's coming loose there, it just feels a little more out of control. So trying to push it in to get it so the cord stays in place just helps make the job a little easier. And so we've got the first of the 3 rings. I think you can see it once that's held in place, it does feel easier. You sometimes feel like an extra pair of hands would be helpful. So when it's holding in place, and this is convenient because the cord goes all the way around the neck, which makes it much easier to do. The cord length, I have to say, is a tricky one. You want it to be nice and long so you can get quite a lot of work done, but if you end up getting it really long, so if you're doing a large beaker for instance and decorating that, if it's really long and long enough to go all the way around the whole beaker, it can get a bit out of hand. It can just feel like there's just too much of it and it gets in the way. So I think with cord there's a sort of finding what's right for you situation, which is really important. So I do that. The last bit that I do is the ring round here. Now, I'm not sure if you can see, but as I've come round, I've left fingernail marks. These sorts of pots do have the marks of the potter on. I'm removing that now, but it's actually quite a nice thing to see and to find. And through making, we can see where you're more likely to get such marks. And my fingernail isn't long, but for pottery it is long, and it's grubby. It's just grubby with clay. Therefore, my fingernail does end up making marks in the clay. Doesn't matter which way you start with, because you're going to make a grid. So you're going one way. Now you can't go absolutely parallel because this is a smaller diameter than this. Therefore you have to slightly elongate, expand that as you come down. And I'll go all the way around with this. Again, I probably won't make you watch the whole entire thing of me doing it. Some kind of sleep therapy, watching someone do a whole one of these. And then I'll come and do the opposite direction. Now, normally I would do the entire ring, but just for the purposes of showing you what it should look like, you then come this way. And again, you're trying to make sure that you're accounting for the fact that the diameter up here is smaller than the diameter at the shoulder of the pot. And we'll come around and do the whole thing. as you come round, there's a tendency to have straightened out these lines a little bit, just as you twist to get that angle absolutely right. So as you come back together where you originally started, you just want to start to try and make it so again you are grading in the angle so that you're coming back into the same angle that you started with, because you will have changed slightly as you've gone round. That's perfectly normal. Now the next bit is doing the edge here, so it's exactly the same. You're coming around on that shoulder there. Now this time the cord is not going to be long enough to go all the way around, so I'll have to press it in, move it, and then press it in again. And I don't worry too much about lining up where I ended with the cord and where I started. They tend to not be too obvious. All the way around. And there we are. That is finished. And it is a very, very beautiful, beautiful piece. Thank you for watching.